Something is deeply wrong in Washington. Nobody expected a Republican to blow the whistle on his own party. Nobody expected the receipts to be this damning. Nobody expected the Attorney General to call the whistleblower a failed politician. Nobody expected a German chemical company to become a national defense priority. Nobody expected the man who wrote the transparency law to accuse his own administration of breaking it. Nobody expected the swamp to be wearing a Roundup-branded hazmat suit. Nobody expected the names of 6 alleged criminals to still be hidden after 3 million documents were released. Nobody expected a congressional reading room to become the most explosive location in American politics. Nobody expected all of this to connect. But it does perfectly, like a machine built to protect the powerful. Here is what Representative Thomas Massie of Kentucky did that has Washington genuinely rattled. He walked onto the House floor, not in a back room, not in a leaked memo, not in an anonymous tip, but in the open, on the record, with the cameras running, and he named names. He connected dots between the Epstein files, the Department of Justice, a German chemical giant named Bayer, and 2 of the most powerful officials in the executive branch. And he did it with documented, verifiable, publicly available evidence. This is not a conspiracy theory from the fringes of the internet. This is a sitting congressman from the same political party as the president, standing inside the United States Capitol and saying, on official record, that the government has been purchased. Let that settle for a moment before we go further. Massie is not a Democrat launching opposition attacks. He is a libertarian-leaning Republican who has often stood alone even within his own party. And the fact that he is the one raising this alarm makes it significantly harder to dismiss as partisan theater. To understand why this moment matters so much, you need to go back to where it started. The Epstein Files Transparency Act, a bill that Massie helped draft and champion, passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 427-1. That number is almost impossible to achieve in today's polarized Congress. Democrats and Republicans, progressives and conservatives, almost every single member agreed that the public deserved to know what was in those files without politically motivated redactions. President Trump signed that bill into law in November, making it the official legal obligation of the Department of Justice to release the Epstein documents without blacking out names, simply to protect powerful or famous individuals from embarrassment. The law was clear. The mandate was clear. The vote was overwhelming. And then, almost immediately, the administration began violating the very law it had just signed. What happened next is where the story becomes genuinely alarming. Massie and Democratic Representative Ro Khanna of California were given access to a DOJ reading room to review what were described as unredacted files. They spent 2 hours inside that room. In those 2 hours, just 2 hours out of 3 million total documents, they identified at least 6 men whose names were still being hidden, men whose presence in those files, in their own words, suggested likely criminal involvement. 2 hours, 6 hidden names, 3 million files remaining. The math on what might still be buried is something every American should sit with quietly. When Massie pressed Attorney General Pam Bondi directly about these missing disclosures at a House Judiciary Committee hearing, she did not answer the legal question. She did not explain the redactions. She called him a failed politician suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, which is a remarkable response from the nation's top law enforcement officer to the congressman who literally wrote the transparency law she is legally required to enforce. But here is where the story shifts from political frustration into something with a much stronger odor. Because the Epstein cover-up allegation and the Bayer lobbying scandal are not 2 separate stories. According to Massie, they share the same roots, and those roots run directly through one lobbying firm that employed 2 of the most consequential officials in the current executive branch. The firm is called Ballard Partners. It is run by Brian Ballard, a man who reportedly raised over $50 million for the Trump campaign and who built one of Washington's most connected lobbying operations. Before taking their current government positions, White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles and Attorney General Pam Bondi both worked at Ballard Partners as paid lobbyists, meaning their legal profession was to influence government decisions on behalf of paying clients. Now here is the part that federal lobbying disclosures make impossible to deny. Bayer, the German chemical corporation behind the weed killer Roundup, paid Ballard Partners to lobby the executive branch on its behalf. This is documented. It is in public records. It is tracked by organizations like U.S. Right to Know, which monitors pesticide industry lobbying. Bayer reported spending over $9 million lobbying Congress and the executive branch in 2025 alone. So to walk through this plainly, the firm that employed the current chief of staff and the current attorney general was simultaneously being paid millions of dollars by a German corporation to influence the exact government offices those women now control. You are allowed to decide what to call that. The facts themselves do not require embellishment. And then came the executive order. On February 18th of this year, President Trump signed a presidential directive invoking a national defense law to declare the production of glyphosate, the active chemical ingredient in Roundup, a national security priority. Agricultural policy experts noted that no president in American history had ever issued an executive order specifically to protect the domestic production of a farm chemical. This was a first. And it came 6 days before Massie stood on the House floor connecting these exact dots. The timing alone would raise eyebrows. The context makes it impossible to look away. Bayer is not an American company. It is a German corporation. Roundup is a commercial herbicide. And yet the executive branch of the United States government determined that keeping Bayer's production operational was a matter of national defense. The administration's top Supreme Court lawyer, operating under Attorney General Bondi, simultaneously filed a legal brief urging the Supreme Court to hear Bayer's appeal, a case in which the company is trying to eliminate all remaining state-level lawsuits filed by people who claim Roundup caused their serious illness. The Supreme Court agreed to hear that case. Oral arguments are scheduled. More than 61,000 people have pending health-related claims against Bayer. If the court rules in the company's favor with active support from the Trump administration, every single one of those cases could be dismissed. 61,000 sick people, many of them farmers, losing their legal right to a day in court, because the administration whose chief of staff and attorney general came from Bayer's lobbying firm argued against them. There is a word for what happens when a product causes harm. The manufacturer knows about it, and people cannot sue. That word is immunity, and that is precisely what Bayer has been spending $9 million a year trying to purchase. The history of this product makes the stakes even harder to stomach. A study that Bayer's predecessor company Monsanto used for decades to argue that glyphosate was completely safe was later formally retracted after investigators discovered that Monsanto employees had secretly authored it themselves while concealing their financial stake in the outcome. The science that was supposed to protect the public had been manufactured by the people profiting from the product. And now that same product is a declared national defense priority. What makes Massie's floor speech so politically significant is not just the content, it is who delivered it. He is a Republican standing up against a Republican administration with Republican officials in the crosshairs. He co-authored a transparency law with a Democrat. He walked into a federal reading room alongside a Democrat. He named Republican-connected officials by their roles on the House floor. This is not partisan theater. This is something rarer and more uncomfortable. It is a member of the governing party saying publicly that the governing party has broken its own promises. The Make America Healthy Again movement, championed by figures within the administration itself, has identified pesticide exposure, including glyphosate, as a contributing factor to long-term health risks in this country. That position appeared in an early MAHA Commission assessment. Then, after what was described as extensive engagement with over 140 agricultural lobbyists, those specific concerns quietly disappeared from the final strategy report. The industry arrived with money and access, and the health warnings vanished. Kelly Ryerson, one of MAHA's most prominent grassroots advocates, stated publicly that the administration's decision to side with Bayer at the Supreme Court could not stray further from what Trump promised the American people on pesticides. This is not a liberal critic speaking. This is someone who campaigned for this president's health agenda, watching it be sold back to the industry it was supposed to confront. What Massie is describing underneath all the specific details is a system operating exactly as designed. Designed not for the public, but for whoever can afford to design it. $9 million buys lobbying access. Lobbying access employs future cabinet officials. Future cabinet officials make decisions that protect past employers. Executive orders follow, Supreme Court briefs follow, redacted files follow, and 61,000 sick people and thousands of unnamed victims follow quietly in the dark. Hey, the congressman from Kentucky has one legal weapon remaining that no administration can touch. Under the speech or debate clause of the United States Constitution, members of Congress cannot be sued or criminally prosecuted for anything they say during official legislative proceedings. He has signaled that he is prepared to walk back onto that floor and read the hidden names aloud. Names that 3 million documents and the full force of the Justice Department have so far managed to keep from the public. If that moment comes, it will not be a political stunt. It will be a congressman using the last constitutional protection available to him to do the one thing the entire machinery of executive power has spent considerable effort preventing, simply telling the American people the truth. The vote was 427-1. The law was signed. The obligation was clear, and still the names are hidden, the files are redacted, the German company has its executive order, and the Attorney General is calling the whistleblower names in a congressional hearing room. Whatever you believe about politics, whatever side of any debate you occupy, the question at the center of all of this is not partisan. It is foundational. It is the question of whether the law applies equally to everyone, to the powerful and the obscure, to the wealthy corporation and the sick farmer, to the connected official and the ordinary citizen. Right now, the answer being demonstrated in real time through redacted documents and executive orders and Supreme Court briefs and $9 million lobbying campaigns is that the law applies to everyone who cannot afford to rewrite it. And one Republican congressman from Kentucky, standing alone at a microphone on the House floor, is saying that is not good enough. He is right.